Welcome back, everybody, to Water Cooler Quarterback, where we act like we know things about football. On today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Yes, we're still going to be talking about football, but we're also going to be talking about yours truly and why I, a kid who grew up in the Pacific Northwest, am a Cardinals fan. See, in order to understand the full story, you've got to go back to the beginning. I was born, raised, and still live in Seattle, Washington, or rather the greater Seattle area. Nearly all of my family lived here in Seattle, and so naturally we rooted for the Mariners, even though they've been god-awful basically my entire life. We rooted for the Sonics before they were stolen from us, and of course we rooted for the Seattle Seahawks. I distinctly remember growing up rooting for guys like Matt Hasselbeck, Sean Alexander, and Lofa Tatupu. The Seahawks were our team, and we loved rooting for them. That said, even though I was a Seahawks fan, as a kid, I wouldn't say I was that into football altogether. In fact, I distinctly remember when the Seahawks went to the Super Bowl against the Steelers, my entire family was cheering them on, watching the game in the living room, while I was in the other room playing Roller Coaster Tycoon on the computer. So at that point in my life, I wasn't exactly an avid fan. I don't know if I even could name half the teams at that age. But as time went on, I became more and more invested in the sport. Fantasy football was a huge thing in our family, and it helped me become acquainted with teams and players that I wouldn't otherwise know or care about. My family also developed a pretty fun tradition. You see, out here on the West Coast, football starts bright and early at 10 a.m. Every morning, my dad would have pancakes ready for us, and we would watch Kurt Menefee and the guys on the Fox NFL pregame show leading up to the morning slate of games. It's gotten to the point where just hearing the Fox pregame music makes me want pancakes. I grew to love the Seahawks more and more with each year and found other teams to be invested in as well. I grew to love the New Orleans Saints during their Super Bowl run especially. Something about them recovering from Katrina and then finding themselves winning the Super Bowl just a couple years later, even as a kid, was something that I found really special. And with that, Drew Brees became one of, if not my absolute favorite player of all time. Now, there was a brief period of time for us Seahawks fans where we had a big question mark at the quarterback position. Matt Hasselbeck was gone and Russell Wilson had not yet joined the team. But I distinctly remember when Russell did come to Seattle, everything changed. All of a sudden we had this underdog kid who not a lot of people had heard of, at least not us casual fans, and, like my other favorite Drew Brees, was too small to play the position. He didn't fit the mold. But that didn't seem to stop him. In fact, Russell brought Seattle all the way to a Super Bowl title in just a couple of years. I had peaked as a fan of the Seattle Seahawks. Over time, becoming more and more invested in this awesome team, I loved watching Seattle thoroughly embarrass the Denver Broncos and bring home the first Super Bowl title that the city has ever seen. I even attended the Seahawks Super Bowl parade and was in the stadium for the ring ceremony. And I mean, that team was just insane. There was the Legion of Boom, Marshawn Lynch, Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse. It was perfect. Everything was wonderful. It was awesome. It couldn't have gotten any better. But of course, the most important season is always the next one. And it could get better. 2 Super Bowls back to back obviously would have been better. And Seattle was this close to it. They almost had it. A second Super Bowl title within their grasp. And everyone knows what happened after that. Yes, the phrase "should have run it" will haunt Seattle fans for all time. Losing that Super Bowl to the New England Patriots was the biggest gut punch I, as a sports fan, had ever experienced. And after that, it just seemed like things weren't quite the same. Much of the team changed. The Legion of Boom started to fracture. Russell Wilson was no longer an underdog once he got paid his big contract, and what seemed like the makings of a dynasty was quickly gone. And that Super Bowl loss came at a very important time for me. You see, the summer before that disappointing finish, I had begun working weekends as I had just turned 16. Keeping up with the Seahawks and with the NFL as a whole became far more difficult as I just literally didn't have time to watch the games anymore. And as the team I loved fell to pieces as a result of that fateful drive that ended in an interception, so too went much of my football fandom. For the next several years, I would periodically check in on the NFL. I would catch a game here or there, hear about the retirement of a player that I always liked watching as a kid, and trying to catch every Super Bowl that I could, provided I could get the day off. The Seahawks were definitely still my team, but I followed them less and less as players I knew became fewer and fewer. Being in high school, I found other things to occupy my time, new hobbies and other interests. And while I always knew football was a thing, I had ultimately lost interest in it. Now, I can already hear people saying that I'm a fair weather fan, and that as soon as things didn't go the Seahawks' way, I gave up on the team. And that's just simply not true. Like I said, the Seahawks were still my team, and I pulled for them any chance I could. But with the inability to consistently watch games and just being in my teenage years with a lot of change in my life, the NFL just became less and less of a priority. I finished high school and went into college still relatively unsure about what I wanted to do. I was still working weekends, and now in college I was even busier and again had other interests. So now I find myself with this weird black hole, a gap in my knowledge of football. Seeing as I didn't follow the league for about 5 years, there's been significant changes, and the whole landscape of the league is completely different than I remember. But in 2020, I finished college, and with that, my schedule changed drastically. I was no longer working weekends, I didn't have Thursday night classes, and for the first time in a long time, there was nothing preventing me from watching games, and football started to slowly but surely make its way back into my life. I remember catching the end of the 2019-2020 season, watching some guy named Patrick Mahomes win a Super Bowl for the Chiefs. I had no idea who this kid was, but after getting just a little taste of football, I was itching for more. You see, the XFL was starting up again that season. Seattle had a team, tickets were cheap, I had some free time, and being that I was curious about football once again, I thought why not give it a shot. So I went to a couple of games before it all got canceled due to COVID. But those 2 games were more than enough. I was back into football. I'd found YouTubers like Brandon Perna with That's Good Sports, who was covering the XFL. And again, as the XFL ended prematurely, I was able to go back and watch a lot of his NFL videos and get fully caught up on what was going on in the league. Through him, I also found guys like Tom Grossi, and I've been fans of them ever since. Those 2 are a large reason that I'm making this channel today, so even though they may never see this video, I just want to give a big shout out to those 2. Eventually, fall came, and like I said, I was no longer working Sundays, so I was able to watch NFL football again. I moved out of my parents' place shortly after the season got started and had my own place with my girlfriend. We got NFL Red Zone for the first time in my life, and I was absolutely hooked. Both through teaching Melissa about the game and being able to watch all of these teams that I haven't been able to watch in the longest time, I'd fallen in love with the sport all over again. Every Sunday, I'd wake up and make pancakes for the 2 of us, just like my dad used to. And I would absorb every second of football that I could, making up for those years that I lost bagging groceries. But this has been a long story. What does this all have to do with the Cardinals? Well, when I got back into football, I was going through a lot in my life. I had lived in Seattle since the day I was born, and I was just done with the gloomy, overcast lifestyle. You see, my parents, for a very long time, had wanted to move to Arizona, and we had taken several family trips down there. Arizona became my dream destination as well. Growing up with more overcast and rainy days than I can count, I was ready for some sun and warmth to be the new norm. So given that I hadn't been following football for quite some time, it just made sense that when I was getting back into it, I might as well become acquainted with the team that was where I was going to be living eventually. But more than that, I just finished college and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. You see, all my life I knew I was going to go to college. I'm very proud of the fact that I graduated. I've got a degree in mathematics and I would love to use that someday. But at the end of the day, going to college was something that had always been laid out for me. It was the original plan since I was like 5 or 6 years old. It was my choice to go, of course, but I'd never really stopped to consider if that's what I wanted to do. I'd never considered working anywhere other than the 2 grocery stores that I worked at for years. I never really considered what I wanted to do, where I wanted to live, or what I wanted for my future. I'd lived my life how I was supposed to. I'd always done what other people told me was the smart thing to do, never really questioning it. I did everything right. I went to school, I got good grades, I worked, and I saved my money. I did what I was told was best and just kind of went through life. And I wasn't happy with that. So while, yes, I started rooting for the Cardinals just because I wanted to move to Arizona someday, it's become something far bigger than that. You see, being a Cardinals fan is a little investment in myself. It's saying that I'm in control of my life, I'm making decisions. I once rooted for a team just because I was born in their city, just like I worked at a grocery store and went to college because that's what I was supposed to do and it was near my home. But now that I'm taking ownership of my life, taking chances, putting myself out there with this channel, planning to move to Arizona, I've made a change and have found a new team. A team I'm still learning a lot about, and one that's probably not going to be very good this year. So, if you thought I was a fair weather fan before, this is confirmation that I'm not. And I can't help but notice another interesting through line here. I really became invested in the Seahawks when Russell Wilson arrived. And of course, I liked the Saints because of Drew Brees. And now I find myself rooting for another undersized underdog quarterback in Kyler Murray. It's sort of a poetic representation of everything I'm saying here, I think. All these guys break the mold. None of them are prototypical QBs. But if any of them listened to everyone else telling them what they should do or shouldn't do, they wouldn't be where they are today. Look, I'm 25 years old. I don't pretend to know what the hell I'm doing in life. But I have learned one thing, and that is that investing in yourself, figuring out what you want to do, and doing that thing is so much more important than doing the right thing that everyone else says you should be doing. And I encourage you and everyone out there to find what that thing is for you. For me, it's this YouTube channel. I'm taking a chance on this, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. At the end of the day, I'm just some dummy sitting in front of a camera. My story is my story, and your story is yours. If you still root for your hometown team, even though you've moved halfway across the country, more power to you, truly. But me? Well, rooting for the Cardinals is something much bigger than just a 17-game season. It's an investment in myself. And even though I've only rooted for them for a couple of years now, I'm very proud to be a Cardinals fan. So until next time, my name is Andrew, and rise up, Red Sea. Whew, man, my family's gonna love this one.